Picture a massive cheering crowd, just thousands of people packed into a city square, or a stadium, and they're all wearing the same colors, chanting the same words, facing the exact same direction.
Yeah, we've all seen that imagery. It's powerful.
It is. And when you look at a scene like that, your brain immediately takes a shortcut. I mean, you assume that everyone in that crowd is there for the exact same reason.
Right. You look at that sea of faces and think, well, they must all believe in the cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, we are going to completely shatter that assumption. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we have two incredibly dense, frankly, absolutely fascinating academic manuscripts on our hands.
They really are dense, but there is so much to unpack here.
Oh, for sure. They apply something called Gibsonian accumulation theory to human political and civic systems. And our mission for this deep dive is to decode the hidden architecture of loyalty.
Right. We're figuring out why we stay in groups, regimes, or movements, and how these massive systems can actually, well, trick us into remaining loyal long after they've completely turned against us.
Yeah, so think about the groups you belong to, whether it's a political party, a corporate culture, a neighborhood association, whatever. Are you genuinely there out of true belief? Or are you there out of habit, fear, or because your personal identity is just trapped?
It's a profound question, and the framework we're exploring today approaches this in a really brilliant way because it stops treating humans as homogeneous grains of sand that just predictably pile up into a functioning society.
Like we're just passive material.
Right. Instead, the core thesis here is that you and I are thresholded nodes within a civic structure.
Thresholded nodes.
Yeah, meaning we aren't passive. We are individual processors constantly and often subconsciously weighing our viability, our safety, and our dignity against our loyalty to the group.
So that massive crowd I just mentioned, under this lens, it isn't a unified entity at all.
Not even close. It is what the theory calls a rendered multi-channel object.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because rendered multi-channel object sounds like, I don't know, something out of a video game engine, not sociology. What does that actually mean for the people standing in the crowd?
Right. It does sound very tech-heavy, but think of it like a digital image that looks like a single solid picture on your screen, but it's actually rendered from dozens of invisible overlapping layers.
Oh, okay. Like in Photoshop or something.
Exactly like that. If you pull the layers apart, they look completely different. So before we can figure out why you might stay in a system or decide to leave, we have to move past the illusion of that unified crowd and look at its actual chemical makeup.
The actual motivation.
Yes. The model proposes that participation is not a primitive single state of being. It's a composite. It's rendered from three completely distinct psychological modes.
Assent, submission, and fusion.
You've got it. Those three.
So when I look at a crowd, I'm actually looking at three entirely different, invisible motivations mashed together. Let's break those down because this feels like the master key to everything else we're going to talk about today.
It absolutely is the master key. Let's start with assent. This is what we usually think of when we picture a healthy group. Assent rises when the system actually works for you.
Right, when it feeds you, protects you, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It provides net benefits and gives you a sense of inclusion. You are there because you choose to be, and you tangibly benefit from it. You join the neighborhood watch because you want a safe street, and the street gets safer. That's assent.
Makes total sense. But then there's submission.
Right, and submission has absolutely nothing to do with benefit. Submission rises under conditions of fear, entrapment, habit, and retaliation exposure.
So you participate not because you want to, but because the cost of leaving is terrifying.
Precisely. You stay at a wildly toxic company not because you love the work, but because you will lose your family's health insurance if you quit. That's pure submission.
And then there's the third layer, which is fusion. And I have to say, this one blew my mind.
Fusion is fascinating. It's when your personal identity and the group's fate become so deeply entangled that you cannot tell where you end and the movement begins.
Wow. So the framework points out that two crowds of identical size with the exact same visible enthusiasm can be made of radically different political matter.
Yes, exactly.
Right, it's like looking at three structurally sound buildings from the outside. They all look identical. But if you strip away the drywall and look at the architecture, one is held together by solid steel.
Right. The steel is assent.
Yeah, and one is held together by duct tape and active threats of violence, which is submission. And the third one is standing simply because the bricks literally think they are the building. That's fusion.
I love that. That building analogy perfectly captures the danger of fusion. It leads directly to what this model calls a fandom order.
A fandom order, like pop culture fandoms.
Similar energy, but applied to civic structures. A fandom order is a structure where the actual material benefit to the individual is virtually zero. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it doesn't feed you, it doesn't protect your physical needs, it might even actively impoverish you, but it survives entirely on symbolic surplus and identity fusion.
So the people in a fandom order persist because the ritual and the shared identity keep them locked in, even when there is no practical utility to staying.
Exactly. The identity is the glue.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. If a crowd or a whole regime can be held together by fear or fusion rather than actual healthy assent, how do we ever know if a system is actually stable?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because it feels like we're saying a system could look perfectly healthy on the outside while it is actively rotting on the inside.
And that is precisely the illusion we fall for. The framework introduces two different surfaces to measure any system. There is the occupancy surface, which is just the visible participator.
Like who shows up to the rallies.
Right. Who shows up, who sits at their desk from 9 to 5, who pays their dues, who stays quiet, and then there is the maintenance surface.
Okay, the maintenance surface, what is that? That's the system's actual ability to replenish the viability, the survival, and the continuity of its people.
I have to challenge this premise, though, just, to play devil's advocate. Let's look at human behavior in the real world.
Sure, let's look at it.
If a regime or a corporation has total compliance, there are no protests in the streets, nobody is striking, the polling looks good, everyone is doing what they're told, isn't that, practically speaking, the literal definition of a stable system?
It seems like it, doesn't it?
Right. Why wouldn't it be?
Because you are only measuring the occupancy. You are looking at the building and saying, well, the bricks are all in place, so it's fine. But this framework introduces the theatrical stability theorem.
Theatrical stability, that's a great phrase.
It is. A system can have high compliance and high visible occupancy, but still be consuming its human substrate faster than it restores it. Imagine a brittle authoritarian order.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
On the surface, everyone is complying, but it survives entirely by submission. When a system increases its retaliation exposure, meaning it threatens to punish anyone who steps out of line, visible dissent drops instantly. People put their heads down.
Right, because they're terrified. But the compliance looks perfect.
Exactly. But the model shows that grievance and humiliation load don't disappear just because people stop complaining out loud. They accumulate hidden beneath the surface.
Ah, so the maintenance surface is collapsing.
Yes. Think of it like structural metal fatigue in an airplane wing. To the naked eye, the metal looks perfectly smooth and stable, but at a microscopic level, microfractures are webbing across the material. It is a delayed catastrophe just waiting for a trigger.
Wow. Okay, so the pile of sand looks fine from a distance, but the individual grains are cracking under the pressure, which pivots us perfectly to the perspective of the individual.
Yes, we have to zoom in.
Because up until now, we've been talking about the pile, the regime, the movement, the corporate system. And the pile only cares about one thing: retaining its shape and keeping its visible occupancy high.
That's all it cares about.
But if the pile is rusting from the inside, how does an individual survive that? What is the math for the person on the ground?
This is where we get into the grain standpoint formalism. You have to look at the pile from the perspective of a single grain being crushed at the bottom.
And the pile and the grain want very different things.
Entirely different. The pile asks a very specific optimization question. How do we keep these nodes load-bearing? How do we extract maximum work, compliance, and votes?
Right.
But the grain you, me, the individual person, asks a totally different question. Which action best preserves my viability, my dignity, and my future?
And those two optimization goals are entirely at odds. For the individual, this framework weighs your state through deeply human variables. We're talking about things like humiliation load.
Which is the daily indignities you suffer.
Right. And then there's meaning violation load, which is being forced to do things that contradict your core values. And moral injury.
Yes, moral injury is huge here. It's defined as the personal, psychological cost of continuing to sustain an unjust system.
And against all of that structural pain, the individual has defiance capacity.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, here is where the model gets incredibly mechanical about human choice. Choice isn't just you floating freely in a vacuum deciding what to do today based on a pros and cons list.
No.
No, choice is a threshold-gated redistribution.
Okay, we definitely need an ELI 5 translation for threshold-gated redistribution.
Fair enough. Imagine a massive concrete dam holding back a reservoir of water. The water pressure is your destabilizing pain, your humiliation load, your moral injury.
Okay, I'm with you.
The concrete dam is your stabilizing lock. It's your need for a paycheck, your fear of retaliation, the social cost of leaving. You don't slowly leak out to a new choice.
You don't just ease your way out.
Exactly. You don't even look for a spillway or an exit door until the water pressure formally exceeds the structural strength of the concrete. Until that specific threshold is breached, the water stays exactly where it is no matter how much pressure builds up.
That makes so much sense when you think about a toxic workplace or a bad relationship you might have been in.
Yeah.
You don't just rationally weigh the situation every morning and think, oh, I should leave.
No, you endure.
Right? You don't even look at the job boards. You endure, and you endure until the meaning violation load finally cracks the concrete of your personal dam. You stay right up until the exact moment the mass flips.
Exactly.
But regimes and terrible systems know this, right? How do they manipulate that dam?
They do it by artificially raising what the framework calls exit friction. This is like increasing the gravitational pull of a planet.
Oh, I see.
The heavier the planet, the more rocket fuel or defiance capacity you need to escape its orbit. A toxic regime doesn't have to make your life better or lower your humiliation load to keep you from reaching the activation gate.
They just have to make leaving impossible.
Right. They just make the perceived cost of leaving so terrifying or so socially devastating that the concrete dam becomes impossibly thick.
But I've seen people stay in relationships or jobs that definitely pass that threshold, where the pain is astronomical, the exit door is right there, and they still don't leave. Why? If the math of load versus lock is so logical, why do people stay in systems that are actively destroying them?
That leads us to the most dangerous weapon a system has. They weaponize your past against your present.
Your own past.
Yes. The framework introduces a concept called the historical assent stock. This is your accumulated memory of being fed, protected, and included by the group in the past.
Oh, like a bank account of goodwill.
Exactly. Long residence, long-standing benefits, and deep civic fusion build up this massive psychological stock of historical loyalty. The problem is that regimes treat this historical benefit as a timeless, infinite debt that you owe them forever.
Oh, wow.
They project this narrative that says, we protected you 10 years ago. We gave you your start in this industry. Therefore, you owe us your absolute obedience today.
So they use your own gratitude to trap you. But the model argues this is a mathematical trap, doesn't it? Because the system you originally pledged loyalty to might not even exist anymore.
Exactly. This introduces the regime continuity defect. This is a measure of how much the regime has drifted or completely changed state from the one you originally assented to.
It's like joining a scrappy, idealistic startup, and 5 years later it gets bought by a soulless private equity firm that fires all your friends. It's not the same company.
Spot on. The framework states that your historical benefit must be heavily discounted by this continuity defect. If the system has completely morphed into something unrecognizable, that historical stock shouldn't bind you anymore.
That makes total sense.
And failing to recognize that defect brings us to the central diagnosis of this entire theory: the Socratic error.
The Socratic error. Let's dig into that.
It is a formal misclassification where a person treats their continued participation in a system as noble, principled assent when, structurally, it is actually submission to a regime that has completely changed.
Wait, are we talking about the actual historical Socrates? Are you saying Socrates made a mathematical error?
According to this model, yes. Socrates drinking the hemlock is cited as the prime example.
No way.
Yes. He stayed in Athens and accepted execution because he believed he owed a debt of loyalty to the state that had nurtured him. But the Athens that ordered his death was an increasingly paranoid, unstable democracy that had radically drifted from the ideals he originally assented to.
So the continuity defect was huge.
Massive. He overbound himself to the ghost of a regime. He failed to apply the regime continuity defect to his historical assent stock.
That is an incredible reframing of history. I mean, we're taught that Socrates made this pure, timeless moral stand. But this model suggests he committed a continuity error. He let the state weaponize his past against his present survival.
Exactly.
Have you ever stayed at a job because a manager did you a massive favor 5 years ago, even though the current management is currently burning you out and ruining your health?
Yeah.
You're doing exactly what Socrates did.
What's fascinating here is how incredibly common it is, and the framework details specific psychological traps that stem from this. There is the maintenance trap, where a regime has become actively maintenance negative for you.
Meaning it is literally consuming your physical or mental well-being.
Right, but you still score it in your head as if it's the old mutually beneficial order. And there is the continuity trap, where the regime has drifted into authoritarianism, but you treat your past loyalty as a legally binding contract on your soul.
That's horrifying.
It is. In these traps, you trick yourself. You narrate your own continued participation to yourself as principled assent, but structurally, you are experiencing an assent submission inversion.
An assent submission inversion.
Yes. You are submitting to coercion, but you are calling it loyalty so you can sleep at night.
That is heavy. It's an elaborate form of self-deception just to survive the humiliation load. So let's say the dam finally breaks. I wake up. I realize the startup I loved is gone. Or the political party I believed in has morphed into something terrifying. I realize I'm committing the Socratic error. My structural pain has formally exceeded my structural lock. The activation gate opens.
The water spills over.
Right.
Yeah.
What actually happens next? Do I just leave?
It's not a simple binary of stay versus leave, because the system is complex, the exits are complex, the framework outlines highly specific admissible action channels for the individual once that gate opens.
What are the channels?
Well, you have assenting stay, where you genuinely want to remain and fight for the original ideals. You have submissive stay, where the gate opens but the exit friction is still too high, so you realize you are trapped.
So you stay, but you know you're trapped.
Right. But if you actually move to exit, you might choose quiet exit, which is slipping away unnoticed, essentially quiet quitting a society. Or you might choose defiant exit, leaving loudly and publicly to damage the regime's theatrical stability.
Like blowing the whistle on your way out.
Exactly. You might choose resistance, staying physically inside the system but actively working to sabotage the pile. Or, in the most extreme, rare case, martyrdom.
Let's talk about the friction around leaving, though, because even when the gate opens, actually taking the exit channel isn't easy. The framework identifies the exit mispricing trap.
Yes.
This happens when you feel you can't leave, because the fusion we talked about earlier artificially inflates the psychological cost of leaving far beyond the actual physical burden.
That's the danger of fusion.
Right. You think, I will lose my entire identity, my entire community, my entire sense of self if I leave this movement. Even if physically walking away is as simple as packing a bag or handing in a resignation letter. You misprice the cost of the exit because your identity is entangled.
Which is exactly why we need to talk about that final action channel, martyrdom. We just discussed how Socrates made a mathematical error by staying to drink the hemlock out of a misplaced sense of historical duty.
Right.
But the model doesn't claim that all self-sacrifice is irrational. It introduces a martyrdom exception.
I was wondering about this. Because if the entire goal of the grain is to preserve its own viability and survival, how can willingly giving up your own viability ever be a rational choice in this math equation?
It becomes mathematically rational only if it is driven by what the framework calls a high terminal bequest value.
Okay, another big term, terminal bequest value. What is the mechanism there?
Think of it as the expected downstream value of your terminal act. It's the inheritance you leave for future generations, for your followers, or for the cause of resistance.
Oh, let me see.
If you know the system is irredeemably broken and you calculate that your definitive self-sacrificial exit will violently shatter the theatrical stability of the regime, if it will inspire a massive redistribution of support away from the pile, then martyrdom actually outranks flight in your own sovereignty calculus.
Wow.
Your death achieves more for the viability of your fellow grains than your continued survival would. It is an instrumental, calculated act of witness. It is a weapon. It is fundamentally different from an act of blind obedience to a broken system.
So what does this all mean? Let me make sure I have this crystal clear, because this feels like the crux of the entire deep dive.
Go for it.
We are looking at three very distinct realities that from the outside look exactly the same. There's true assent. The system still works for you. The historical bond makes sense. You benefit and you stay.
Correct.
Then there's misclassified submission. The system is actively consuming you. It's changed completely, but you're trapped by history and fear, and you lie to yourself and call it loyalty to cope.
Yes, the Socratic error.
And finally, instrumental martyrdom. You know, the system is completely broken. You don't owe it a single thing, but you use your exit or your sacrifice as a targeted weapon to inspire others and damage the pile's occupancy surface.
That is exactly the distinction. Those are three entirely different political acts happening inside that crowd we visualized at the very beginning. It proves why you cannot judge the stability, the health, or the morality of a system simply by looking at its visible surface.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at a massive, faceless crowd and broke it down into its true chemical components: assent, submission, and fusion.
Right.
We stripped the drywall off the building to see if it was held together by steel or duct tape. We exposed how failing regimes hide behind theatrical stability, projecting strength, while their maintenance surfaces collapse from metal fatigue.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We zoomed in on the individual to understand how meaning violation loads battle against exit friction and the gravity of leaving. And finally, we gave you the exact terminology, like the Socratic error and the assent submission inversion, to recognize when a system is weaponizing your past loyalty against your present survival.
And as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final lingering idea to mull over. We learned today that human choice is a threshold-gated response. You only look for alternative actions, you only look for the spillway in the dam when your structural pain formally exceeds your structural lock. But consider this implication. What if the most tyrannical, perfectly designed regimes in history aren't the ones that forcefully crush your ability to choose with massive, overt violence?
Then what are they?
What if the truly unbeatable systems are the ones that meticulously manage your humiliation load? Imagine a system that calibrates your daily grievances, your economic stress, and your moral injury so precisely that they keep your pain at a constant simmer, exactly 1 single degree below your activation threshold.
Oh my God.
In a perfectly calibrated system like that, you never even realize the gate to your own exit is unlocked.
That is an absolutely chilling thought. Because the crowd keeps cheering, the pile keeps its visible shape, and the individual grains never quite find the momentum to spill over the dam. Thank you for coming on this deep dive to the source material with us today. Keep questioning the invisible architecture around you, take a hard look at the structural integrity of the buildings you're helping to hold up, and we will see you next time.